trying to explain to people in a non-overly confrontational way why a lot of them don't ever save any money.
Yeah.
Where they won't save any money. I was trying to understand it from an egotistical perspective because I know somewhere in there has to be the reason why people don't seem to they get rid of it as soon as they get it. They don't want to, and I don't
So why do you think people don't save?
I think most people basically will get 60 to 90 days worth of security, and that's good enough for them.
Okay. So yeah, so the Stoic would say life is way more unpredictable than you think it is, right? And so sure, the ego says look, things are good, things will always be good. I'm successful now, I'm going to continue to be successful. Bad things can't happen to me. And so I think in Stoicism, there's also a bit of humility that says no, this could all go away tomorrow. And then you act accordingly. I think that's really important. So yeah, I think there's probably ego in not saving in the sense that you're just I'm killing it now, I'm going to continue killing it forever, and maybe a less arrogant person would go, actually no, I'm on a lucky streak, I'm talented, I'm working hard, but this sort of unbroken string of success isn't all my doing, and so I'm going to be more conservative as a result.
How many of you read his book on Stoicism, or you write a lot about that on your blog too? Mm-hmm. Anyone have? I definitely. Julie and I've listened to it twice. So that was your response in email, by the way. I remember well. Yeah, and cool. so the essence, the question that interests me about what you just said is what were the Stoics were? Some of them were incredibly wealthy.
Yes, Seneca was probably the second richest man in Rome. Marcus Aurelius is the emperor. He has all the money. So
wasn't he supposed to be the richest man in the history of history, supposedly? Even Bezos?
Something like that,
yeah. So those guys, Marcus Aurelius, when you read the writings of those folks, there's no ego.
Well, yeah, what's interesting, so Marcus Aurelius, he inherits a Roman Empire that's sort of in its first stages of decline, and there's a sort of a financial crisis. And so the first thing he does, which I love, is he starts selling off the palace furnishings. So he's the emperor, so he could have just levied very high taxes on the people. And he says, no, look, I'm the emperor, I should suffer first, right? Why do I need all these fancy things? Why am I going to ask other people to sacrifice, and I'm not going to sacrifice first? So I like that. And then Seneca, who was extraordinary. Seneca was so wealthy that he made all these sort of basically what we call them now sort of hard money loans, the British colony, which was part of the Roman. And when the loans came due, the interest rate had been so high and the loans were so sort of pervasive that it actually bankrupts the entire economy and sets off a whole rebellion. Very, very wealthy. But he would talk about how one day a month he would practice poverty. He would try to, he wouldn't spend any money. He would put on crappy clothes. He would try not to eat as much. He would try to experience the poverty that his life was very far from, so that he wasn't afraid of it. And I like that a lot. I mean, I probably wouldn't do it literally, but I think as a thought exercise, it's okay, what would half look like for me? Would it really be that bad?
So you're talking about overcoming fear.
Well, overcoming fear, but also just overcoming. So let's say you're afraid of losing everything. You might be too aggressive financially because you want that not to happen. Whereas if you were a little bit more familiar with it, you're look, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, but I'm fine. I'm able to absorb sort of ups and downs because I know generally I'm going in the direction that I want to go. I think it's okay, if I had to sell my house, if I had to go get a job, right? If I had to do these things, would it really be that bad? No, I would be fine. I mean, that's what my life was like before that, and I was for this, and I was happy, and if that's what I had to do to support my family, I wouldn't feel embarrassed about it. So I'm not gonna let that sort of amorphous, back of my head fear influence my decisions, because it's actually not that bad. It's ironic that sometimes the thing we're terrified of, we end up making decisions on that actually brings it about,
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe sort of walking through those things that we're afraid of lets us not do that.
Did y'all catch what he just said? I mean, whatever you sort of put all your energies on, you have a tendency to manifest. There's that woo-woo word. I hate using woo-woo words, but it's true.
Yeah, look, I'm not talking about the law of attraction.
Yeah, I'm trying to,
But it's look, if you're paranoid, you are going to be selfish and untrusting and in your own way disloyal, and you're going to bring about reasons that you should actually be paranoid, right? Like if you treat people crappy and you think that they don't like you, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Is really
Confirm you look for things to confirm your bias and your beliefs, and next thing you know, that's your life.
Yeah, and look, like if you're not treating people well, they really are going to work against you, and so just don't. Again, I think it's all about sort of keeping this even keel, not being puffed up when it's going great, not being sort of knocked down when it's not going as well, and I think that's probably the best way to do it.
I have 2 more pages, but do you want to take a break?
No,
you good?
I'm good.
Any questions? Yes? She's got good questions.
All
Watch
right.
out.
What influenced you to write the book about the lawsuit?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Good question.
I think generally as a person, you never want to be doing the same thing over and over again. So I'd written, a handful of books that had done really well in one vein. I wanted to just test myself. Could I do this other form of writing? And I'm going to come back to the stuff that I did before at some point, but I'm not going to grow doing the same thing over and over again. So that was part of it. And then I was also just fascinated with the story, and I wanted to use it as a vehicle to talk sort of about strategy and patience and long-term planning, and I wanted to use it as a way to talk about some other things that I was interested in.
Didn't Peter contact you, like the DL, to write it? I mean, he asked you to write it.
So I happen to have connections to a couple of the people involved, and so I felt like maybe I was probably the only person who could get both perspectives. So that was part of it too.
Well, I think I read that you talked about the meeting where you were like, how did that work? How does a billionaire ask you to write a book?
Well, so he didn't ask me to write a book, but he just expressed a willingness to answer my question, and he had not talked to anyone else about it. So
Interesting.
It was primarily about access, but yeah, I was able to sort of spend time with basically all the people involved, and that made this the story more interesting to me to tell, certainly.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be made into a movie. That's
It
such
is.
an incredible story. Well, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's being adapted to be a movie. Who knows if it'll actually happen, but
It will.
okay.
You can buy some more cows.
All right, that's what I'll do.
How important are mentors to you?
I mean, I think it's everything. Again, look, you can learn a lot of these things a lot of these lessons by painful trial and error. Well, why would you do that if you don't have to? So, for instance, as a writer, I started as a research assistant to another writer. So before I even had an idea,
Robert Greene,
who wrote the 48 Laws of Power, he wrote a book called Mastery. He has a book coming out later this year called The Laws of Human Nature that's spectacular. But basically, I learned how books are made first before I had really any idea of what book I would write. And that's really important. So many people, even now in the Silicon Valley, in the entrepreneurship space, I talk to people, they're like, I'm going to start a company in the healthcare space. And it's like, do you know anyone in healthcare? Have you ever worked in healthcare? Have you even used this sort of part of health? No. So you're now going to learn, not only do you have a steep learning curve, but you're going to make a lot of mistakes that someone who is more familiar with that space wouldn't have had. And so I think about, all the things that you're going to pick up, you're going to know by the end of your career. Why don't you start there? Why don't you start by someone who's there and get a crash course in everything? I think that's really important. So not just like domain. So first, let's just say mentors are really important in terms of domain-specific information. But then you should also have sort of personal mentors or people who maybe they are also in your industry, but people who are like, I want to end up like that person. Like they have the family that I want, they have the lifestyle that I want, they comport themselves or carry themselves the way that I want to. And so they can also go like, that's the kind of person who's going to go like, Ryan, like, you are embarrassing yourself. Like you're way off, you're wrong here. This is gonna. I remember when that was happening to me, and I made these mistakes. So I think mentors are there to make sure that you don't make unnecessary mistakes, and they're a support system for when you inevitably do make mistakes or go through difficulties. So
you have professional mentors. If you guys haven't read Robert Greene's books, they're amazing. 48 Laws of Power, amazing book.
So Robert's a good example of someone who's both a personal and a professional mentor. So he's a master of his craft. So for the first part of our relationship, he was just showing me how this stuff works. And now he's the kind of person that gives me great personal advice as well. And then there's other people in my life that are just, we're not even remotely in the same businesses, but I just sort of respect her, and I have a lot of admiration for them. And so I'm like, hey, I remember I had lunch with a friend of mine a couple months ago, and I said, look, I'm about where you were 10 years ago. Sort of my career's going well, I've got a decent amount of money, I've got a decent amount of reputation. Like, I said, what were the best decisions that you made at this point in your life that you think I should be thinking about now? And he gave me a bunch of great advice. And so you want to, and I'll ask other people, people have been married for a long time.
That's what I was going to ask you. So you have mentors in different aspects of your life.
Yeah, and look, I have a more expansive definition of a mentor. Like, my relationship with Robert was probably closer to an apprenticeship for the first few years. Like, I worked for him, he was giving me training, but then now I just ask, you can have a mentor who's not alive, right? Mm-hmm. A book is a great form of mentorship. Someone spent a year or 2 years of their life condensing everything they knew about a topic into a bunch of pages, and then you can read that. A What Would Jesus Do bracelet is a form of mentorship. You're like, it goes back to what we're talking about. It's like, what would this person do in that scenario? That's what I should do. So there's that. And then there's also just like, I just try to ask questions all the time to people about things that I'm struggling with or have questions about or don't know about, so that I can incorporate that feedback into the decisions that I make. How
do you say no?
Not great at it. So I don't say it often.
That's the reason you're here.
No, it's the hardest thing to do. It's funny because, early in a career, my friend Austin Kleon, who lives in Austin, he says that, as a writer or an artist, at the beginning of your career, you say yes to everything until you can say no, right? That you have to say yes to everything until you're in a position to have the luxury of saying no. So the hard part is like, when are you at that point, right? When is it responsible? When is it more responsible to say no to an opportunity than to say yes to that opportunity? And I don't have a firm, good answer because I struggle with it all the time. But in a weird way, if you're sort of a hustler, if you have initiative, if you work hard, eventually you're going to find yourself in a position where you have more opportunities or more, things in front of you than you can reasonably say yes to, and then you paradoxically have to have the discipline to say no rather than saying yes, because you'll hit a breaking point, or you won't have the resources to actually take advantage of any of those opportunities. And so that's something I struggle with a lot.
Who are the people like that are alive?
Yeah.
That you admire? Who is it that you're like, oh my gosh, that maybe we've never heard of him before? Kind of maybe Silicon Valley types.
Yeah. So Robert is a good example of that one for me. Someone I talk to a lot. There's someone I know named Ricky Van Deen. He was the founder of College Humor, and now he's I think head of video at Facebook. He's like just a really smart, well-adjusted person. He seems like he's had all the success, but it's never really gone to his head. So there's just people like that I just sort of have. I go like, hey, this I'm going to track myself against that person, and I'm going to sort of use them as a sounding board or a reference point to go, what would they do in this situation, or how would this affect them, or I might just ask them, what would you do in this scenario, and you should have a lot of those people, and obviously for me as a writer, as someone who loves books, a lot of the people most of my mentors I'd say are not alive. And that's why I love reading so much, is I feel like they're sort of teaching you how to live.
You have a lot of connections, obviously, to the tech world. It seems like a lot of your... Tim Ferriss said something really funny, I forget, on a Reddit blog, actually. He said he left San Francisco because the asshole inflation had gotten too high.
Yeah.
And moved here. Mm-hmm. So...
Tim actually stayed at my house when he was shopping for something in Austin. I think it's great that he moved here. I think, it's weird. I think people don't... Like, for instance, I'm miserable in a big city. Like, when I go to New York City, I'm like, how does a human live here? This is horrific. But I could have also easily seen a scenario in which I overrode that because, like, my business was the best it ever was when I lived in New York City. So I had to make a decision and go, well, what's more important? And I probably got a bunch of advice from people. Actually, I remember I talked to Tim. He was saying, he's like, what do you do with your money? That's what he said. And I was like, well, I don't know. I don't spend it. It just goes in a bank account. And he said, okay, so why do you need your business to be at that level? And it was a great point. And I was like, I didn't. So, okay, so I could move to Austin. Maybe I'm going to have fewer marketing clients for my marketing business. But first off, things are cheaper. But also, it's just not going into it's not, just being added to a number somewhere on a spreadsheet. And I'm much happier. Isn't that the whole point, right? What do people do with their money? They buy things that they think will make them happy. Well, what if just making less money, but you could be where you wanted to be, or you only had to do the things that you wanted to do?
Now we're getting back to Stoicism.
Yes.
Yeah. If we meandered back to Stoicism, because
Yeah.
that's a really good point, though. There's no answer for that, or do you have? You're
answer
living your
what?
answer? Well, I mean, the balance of between working, getting more, and essentially, like, at what point? Because it's true. There's been all kinds of studies been done. Said you achieve a certain level of financial success.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. It's very hard to be happy if you can't pay your rent, but after your sort of more basic material needs are met, there's a diminishing return to the more that you make. So you better either really like what you're doing and you're indifferent to the money, or you better find somewhere that you actually enjoy where you're living and what you're doing. And so what I try to think about with my life is, like, what do I want my day to look like? Not like, how can I make the most money or how can I get the most attention? But, like, what do I want my day to look like? And so for me, my day is like, I want to have as much time as possible to write. I want to be able to spend time with my kid. I want to be able to have, sort of time to exercise or hang out, or, like, I don't want, to me, success is not having to do things that I don't want to do. So if to make more money, I have to do a bunch of stuff that I don't want to do.
Aha! So one of our points is do what you don't want to do, and you don't want to do it at the highest level. And they were laughing at me. They were laughing at my expense, and then you.
No,
good job.
I definitely agree with that at a general level. Like, let's say I'm writing a book. I have to sort of push past, like, if they're like, you have to do another pass of this book. And I'm like, but I want it to be done now. Pushing past that sort of wanting to settle is how you get something great. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, let's say I hate pitching, right? Like, I don't like having to go out and sell. I don't like the whole rigmarole of, I'll send you a deck, and then I'll send you a contract, and we'll negotiate the contract, and blah, 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 blah. And so I was like, well, how can I set up my business so I don't have to do that?
You're talking about when you're a marketing company.
Yes. Yeah, how can I set up my business so it's actually creating the life that I want? So instead of having a miserable career, but then I can afford a 40-foot speedboat that that makes me happy one day a week, why can't I just have the 7 days of a week? Maybe I can't afford the speedboat, but I don't have to do things that I don't want to do. Does that make sense?
It does. So there's that balance, which
Yeah.
makes total sense. And then there's the folks that want to achieve more.
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
Well, like as a writer, this is another example. So as a writer, you get successful as a writer. They give you all sorts of opportunities to do things that are not writing, right? So speaking or consulting. Writers I know have started different companies based around their books. But they don't have time to do the one thing that they like, which is write. And so to me, that seems like a punishment, right? Like, success in a given, it'd be like if you really love basketball and then you get drafted in the NBA, but then you spend all your time shooting Gatorade commercials and you never get to play basketball. And because you're never practicing, you're never playing, your performance suffers. And so that's what I go, like, what are the really important things? Like, what is the thing that only I can do that I'm sort of I want to have discipline around that. So that's where I have to get better at saying no, and where I try to get better at saying no. It's like, is this thing taking me away? Like, if I spend all morning on the phone and then I'm exhausted and then my mind isn't clear enough to sit down and write, my next book is going to suffer, and that's the most important thing to me. And so I have to have that discipline.